any kind of attention, getting very hysterical, violent sort of behaviour.
So how did you cope with that?
Well, we tried everything we could think of, from quiet reason to putting her on the floor and sitting on her.
What's surprising is that the Kent project has had little difficulty in finding families willing to take young people like Pamela. After nearly 2 years, the Blackers had done enough to give Pamela a new start in life. She met and married Brian, and her relationship with the Blackers is now that of any young adult with her family. She's a regular and a welcome visitor.
Well, what has happened to her, I think, is that she now believes in herself. She has self-opinion. She's discovered that she is an individual person, that she can make her own way in life. And of course, Brian has been a magic thing to happen to her, because he is her own person who loves her absolutely for herself and for no other reason.
How much does fostering cost compared to the cost of residential care?
Considerably less, although our kind of fostering is deliberately expensive. We regard one placement as equivalent of a half-time social work job in your own home, and 2 placements as equivalent of a full-time social work job in your own home. For that reason, we pay a professional fee of £45 a week, which is taxable, plus the maintenance-only boarding out rate on top of it, which comes together to just under £60 a week. But when you think of community homes and education, you get into figures like over £200 a week, and if you look at secure units, you get into figures like £490 a week, really big money.
Are there children who can't be fostered?
Well, I suppose there are, but I'm not at all clear who they are.
More and more councils may eventually follow Kent's example and find foster parents for severely disturbed children like Pamela. Already there are 30 similar experimental schemes in other parts of the country. But in the short term, local authorities are bound to go on placing such children inside institutions.
Pamela's case raises the important question of whether or not we ought to be looking after many of Britain's severely disturbed children who are now being treated with drugs in a more natural and less expensive way. As we saw in the film, the Department of Health and Social Security is now being asked to investigate this issue. And earlier this week, I interviewed a junior minister at the department, Sir George Young, to see what he and his colleagues were going to do. We'll be back with what he had to say in just a minute.
Part 2 of the London programme, Children in Care, production number 20004, date recorded 17th of January 1980, take 1.
Sir George, the Minister for Health said last spring that in the year of the child we ought to take a long, hard look at how we treat our problem children. You've had 3/4 of the year of the child in office. What are your conclusions about the particular problem of heavy prescription of tranquilizers and other drugs to these very disturbed minorities?
I think this is a very difficult question. My own view is that advance in drugs has enabled a lot of people who would otherwise have been in institutions for the whole of their lives to return to the community. And I think that there is a role for drugs in treating some of the children that we've looked at. But the actual decision of what to prescribe and for how long is, of course, a clinical decision that should be taken by a doctor. And I think one has to make it clear that the doctor owes his allegiance to the child that he is treating, not to the institution that he's in or the people running it.
Some of the people we've talked to felt that there ought to be some guidelines from the department, not, if you like, compulsory, not interfering with the clinical freedom of the doctor, but giving the individual doctor the benefit of what's known about the possible dangers of prescribing drugs for a very long period of time, for example?
I think many doctors would welcome guidance. I'm not sure that it would be right for me or my colleagues as politicians to do this. I would see such guidance coming from, for example, the Royal College of Psychiatrists, whom we've alerted about this programme. And if they feel that something is wrong, if they feel there's a genuine debate about whether certain drugs should be prescribed, I hope that they would look into it and debate it amongst themselves. And if at the end they felt that there was a call for guidance in the interests of doctors, then that is their decision.
You say you would hope. I mean, but is this a matter of nods and winks, or are you actually setting up some kind of an inquiry into this?
No, we're not setting up an inquiry. We have notified the Royal College of Psychiatrists of this programme, asked them to watch it. And I don't think it would really be right for politicians to intervene in what is really a matter of clinical judgment.
And most of the homes where these children are subject to one form of inspection or another. Some are inspected, as I understand it, by the department, others by local authorities. Do you think it would be possible to suggest to inspectors, starting with the department's own inspectors, that they actively look out for cases where drugs are being used not for the child's benefit, but to make life easier for the staff?
Well, I think you've missed out a very important safeguard that already exists. The children that you've looked at are children in the care of local authorities, and they are responsible. And it's up to each local authority to make sure that the child is getting the right treatment. And if they felt, for example, that the treatment they were getting in a particular home was wrong, they're quite entitled to call for a second opinion. And if they want, they can take the child away and place the child somewhere else. So that is an important safeguard.
It sounds to me a little bit as though you're saying that national politicians can't interfere in clinical matters, but local politicians and councils can.
No, I'm saying that the children already have legal guardians who are responsible and answerable to the courts for their well-being.
I'd like just to talk about the alternatives. Some people feel that we are too squeamish about locking children up, and that is why, as an alternative, doctors sometimes use drugs when perhaps they don't really need to, and when it's perhaps not really in the child's interest. How do you feel about that?
I'm not sure that they are alternatives. Locking up a child is something which would be done by the people running the home, or could be done. Prescribing can only be done by a doctor, so I don't really see them as alternatives.
Well, I think the theory is that in certain difficult circumstances, the people running the home come to the doctor and say, for heaven's sake, give us something to quieten this child down.
Well, in that case, the doctor should only give treatment if it really is in the child's interests and if the child knows what is happening. And I think it would be wrong, actually, to rely on drugs to make the staffing of the home more easy, or to enable it to be run with fewer staff. I think that would be a misuse.
The other alternative, which many of the people we talk to think very highly of, is the alternative of developing fostering schemes like the one in Kent. Do you think that can be an alternative to the use of drugs in these cases?
I don't think it's an alternative necessarily to the use of drugs. It's an alternative to putting children in institutions. It's an option which the government is in favour of. And in a whole range of fields, we're trying to get people out of institutions back into the community. We're very interested in what's going on in Kent. And I hope that other local authorities will try and find foster parents who can tackle this very challenging job. And I think there is a role to play here. Nonetheless, I think there will always be a hard core of children that it would be unreasonable to expect a couple on their own to look after. Some children have been unable to be controlled in community homes with quite a large number of staff, and I think in those circumstances foster parents couldn't cope. But yes, there is scope for progress here, and we're very anxious to encourage it.
So it seems that the Department of Health and Social Security is keen to develop alternative ways of looking after problem children in care. But it's going to wait to see whether or not the Royal College of Psychiatrists feels that there's a need for guidelines on the use of drugs. If it does feel that, then the whole issue may be looked into by the government. That's all for tonight, so until next week, from all of us at the London programme, good night.